Hi, thanks. My name is Dan Olsen. I'm excited to be here to talk with you guys here and everyone who's in the cloud. Just real quick about my background, kind of, so you know where I'm coming from. I had a technical background in electrical engineering, did industrial engineering, and then moved out to Silicon Valley to go to business school, and I've been out here ever since. I've worked in product management my whole career. I started out actually doing really high-tech product management for submarines for the Navy. And then after business school, I worked at Intuit for 5 years, where I worked as a product manager on Quicken and worked my way up and led that team eventually. And then pretty much since Intuit, I've been at startups. Right after Intuit, I went to Friendster to head up product management. So I've worked on some social networking stuff in the early days. And after Friendster, I was pretty much ready to do my own startup. I just didn't have an idea I was passionate about, so I kind of stumbled into consulting to startups as an interim VP of product. Some of my clients were Box and Usenda, Hippocrates. And then I finally had an idea for my own startup, your version in the personalized news space. We bootstrapped it, launched it at TechCrunch 50, won the People's Choice Award. And after we didn't get a hockey stick and didn't raise our next round, I went back to consulting again. So that's what I do now. And I'm happy I go pretty fast. I mean, everyone here is pretty sharp, so we can handle it. But I'm happy to email you my slides, so don't feel like you need to furiously take notes or anything. Okay, and definitely let's keep it interactive. If anybody here has questions about anything I'm talking about, let's talk about it, especially if it's relevant to what you're dealing with at your startup right now. All right, so my talk is how to be a lean product ninja. So I think before I used to always say, who's heard of lean startup? Now it's like, raise your hand if you haven't heard of lean startup. Everyone knows about it. But just to kind of summarize the key points that are relevant to this talk, it's basically about achieving product market fit, validating your product with users, improving and iterating your product quickly, and testing hypotheses. And from a role standpoint, I view product market fit as pretty much the product management role. Now, you may be a founder, I may not have the title product manager, but it's a role or a hat, and I view that that's the role that's responsible for that. Why ninja, aside from being a cool thing to call people? For me, it means that you have a high level of expertise, that you're self-sufficient, and that you have a wide array of skills and tools that you use. Especially at startups. I love talking with startups and entrepreneurs because you don't have necessarily a fully staffed team and tons of resources. Everyone's got to stretch beyond their comfort zone and fill the holes functionally that exist. And so that's when I think about a ninja, someone who can just fill those other gaps and do a wide range of things. So what's the formula for product market fit? We talk about product market fit a lot. I like to break down specifically what it means. For me, it means 4 things. It means a product that meets customer needs, one that's better than other alternatives, one that's easy to use, and one that has a good value or price. And so for me, that taken together, that's what a product market fit means. And for B2C companies, sometimes they ask questions about good value or price if the product's free to end users. But the reality is people have finite time, and so you're contending for their time. If they're going to use one photo app on their phone, they're not going to use another one probably, so they're going to use Instagram. And they're going to have share of time for that category is another way to think about it. So there's a competing resource. Today I'm going to be focusing on how to meet customer needs and how to make sure your product's better than other products. I have other talks that talk about ease of use. There's a talk I gave at Product Camp earlier this year called How to Be a UX Designer on Me1. Should definitely check that out if you want. Okay. And so just from a high level kind of process, the steps we follow to achieve product market fit. First off, and then I'm going to go through each of these, but first off by starting understanding the underserved customer needs, and we'll talk about how we determine underserved in a minute. Secondly, defining what your product's value prop is. Third, building a wireframe or mock-up that represents that value prop. Fourth, getting user feedback on that mock-up, and then iterating until you achieve the product market fit that you want. So let's jump in. The first thing, it always for me starts off with understanding customer needs. And one concept that I found really powerful here is the idea of kind of thinking in the problem space versus solution space. Has anyone here heard of that kind of distinction, problem space solution? It's getting more and more common. It's more from my engineering background that is more common that we would think that way. But let me illustrate it a bit because I think it helps get clarity. So on the left-hand side, we'll have the problem space. A problem space is just a customer problem or need or benefit that the product should address. So it's like a product requirement or like a well-written user story would capture something in the problem space. Solution space is a specific implementation designed to address that need or requirement, whether it's a design or an actual product. That's a solution space artifact. So let me illustrate with an example. When NASA wanted to send people into space, they knew that they had a right and that the pens that they use here that require gravity weren't going to work up there. So they said, okay, we need to get a pen that's going to work up in space. And so one of their contractors, Fisher, spent $1 million in R&D and developed a space pen that writes in space. And you can write upside down, and it's pretty cool. When faced with the same challenge, the Russian space agency just gave the cosmonauts pencils. And so, there are reasons not to have pencils in space. The graphite breaks off and it can get in stuff and things like that. So I'm not trying to make NASA look dumb. But this just illustrates, if you constrain your thinking in the solution space at the beginning of your design process, you're going to not be open to kind of lower scope, higher ROI options potentially. And you can actually buy a Russian space pen. It's a pencil in a box, as you can see. Okay, so let's bring it to software and web stuff that's more relevant. I want to illustrate at the product level. So, I used to work at Intuit, a couple blocks from here on the Quicken team. TurboTax is another product. Hopefully everyone's familiar with that. And basically, when we talk about, okay, who's TurboTax immediate competitor, it's tax cut. And if we try to map back and say, okay, at a high level, what's the problem space benefit that they're trying to deliver? It's basically helping you prepare your taxes. And one thing that was really insightful for me is Scott Cook at Intuit would always say, we'd ask people, who do you think the biggest competitor for TurboTax is? And most people would say tax cut. But he would say, actually, it's pen and paper, because at that point in time, pen and paper, more people were doing their returns in pen and paper and trying to change behavior to use software and online tools. But they're all mapped against the same problem that we're trying to solve. Now, once you have a digital product instead of pen and paper, there's a lot of other benefits it can provide. It can basically help you check your taxes, which can't be done with paper, file your taxes, help you maximize your deductions, help you reduce your audit risk. And so one of the things that's interesting about problem space and solution space is, in the problem space, you can be very simple and just sum it all up like, hey, I'll help you with your taxes. But when you actually get down to it and break it down, you can get very granular and think of a lot of different problem spaces. Likewise, on the solution space, there could be 1 million different permutations of products that try to address these things. So let's take it at the feature level, basically. So we mentioned how one of the benefits, the problem space that TurboTax is trying to do, is help you prepare your taxes. Another one, we talked about reducing your audit risk, checking your return. The other thing you find in the problem space is there are structures or hierarchies and dependencies. So these are all related. We could cluster them together and say all these three help deliver some overall benefit of empowering the user and making them confident about their taxes, right? But there's 3 distinct ones that we can do that support that. Likewise, there might be a separate save time cluster or hierarchy, save time preparing, save time filing. Instead of having to go stand in line at the post office and all that, you can just hit a button and save time. And save money, basically. And you can see, and the other way to think about these is ladders of specificity to kind of high level, and these are the high level ladders: empowerment, save time, save money. They're the same high level benefit ladders we used into it for Quicken as well. And then basically, you can imagine, great, those are my problem space. How am I tackling those at the feature level? You may have specific features, a tax interview wizard that helps you with that. Specific features that help with each one of those. It doesn't always have to be a one-for-one mapping. But the idea is, how is your product, delivering against those features? And so you can think about that way how you want to map your solution space to the problem space. The next thing, once you do this thought exercise of getting really clear on the problem space, like I said, it's hierarchical. You're going to be brainstorming a lot of different granular stuff. There's a book out there called What Customers Want that I recommend, and you'd be surprised. The guy breaks it down, and I'll show the author's name and stuff in a couple slides, but he just breaks, you get like hundreds of things that basically support a product, really detailed things. So you get all these problem space statements or requirements, and then the next question is, great, how do I decide which ones to focus on? Which one should I focus on my product addressing? And if you have an existing product, it applies too. It's the same question, which ones do I focus on optimizing or improving or adding new functionality? And obviously, well, not obviously, but I think it should be based on customer value. You should be prioritizing based on customer value. And then the next question is, great, how do we define customer value? And this can be kind of fuzzy concept, but what you do see out there from various thought leaders is kind of consistency in frameworks. Certainly satisfaction. You see a lot of people talking about customer satisfaction. How satisfied are you with a given product? The other important aspect is importance. And so the importance has to do with the user need in the problem space. Like, how important would it be if I delivered this benefit for you? And the satisfaction is in the solution space of how satisfied are you with the current product. And so, I kind of independently came up with that framework at Intuit. The author of that book came up with the framework, and several other people have these concepts of importance and satisfaction baked into some idea of how you think about customer value. So let me illustrate this here with the 2x2. You know, I'm an MBA, so we have to have a 2x2 in the talk. So on the y-axis is importance of user need from low to high, and on the x-axis is user satisfaction with the current alternative or product. And basically, we'll just divide it into 4 quadrants. Down here, this is low importance of user need and kind of independent of the satisfaction of the users have with current alternatives. It's just not really worth going after things in this space. At the end of the day, the customer benefits just aren't that important to people. So it's not worth spending your time here. Up here, you have a high importance of user needs, so that's good, that's better. But you also have high user satisfaction with the current alternatives. This is kind of the definition of a mature market where products have been out there for a long time and they're kind of at parity. Everyone's happy with it. It could also be in your own product that you've just nailed a feature. Everyone's happy with it. There's no really, you're at the point of diminishing returns and investing more in it. So where you really want to be is up here, where there's a high importance of user need, but they're not really happy with current alternatives. And another interesting thing on this front is they may not be happy with current alternatives, or they may be happy, but you come up with a way, like your innovative product actually comes up with a way to make them even achieve higher levels of happiness than they had before. That's another way of thinking about it. So this is just a helpful framework, whether it's identifying a new market opportunity or prioritizing feature improvements for your own product. Has anyone here heard of the Kano model at all? So the Kano model is another thought leader person who came up with this framework. You can see it's got user satisfaction on the y-axis from kind of completely satisfied at the top to completely dissatisfied at the bottom. And then on the y-axis is how well or how fully is the need met. And the cool thing about his framework is he boils everything down into just one of 3 categories of needs or benefit, or features or benefits, basically. The first is performance, what you would call performance benefits or features. So I'll illustrate this with a car. Say you were trying to buy a new car, and there were 2 cars, and they were identical except for one thing. One had like twice as many miles per gallon as the other one did. You would prefer that one. And basically, miles per gallon is a performance feature. All other things being equal, you're going to pick the one with the higher performance. Must-haves are the second category, and basically here the presence of a must-have doesn't really help your product increase any satisfaction, deliver more customer value, but the absence of that feature or benefit causes a problem. So for a car, this might be seatbelts, right? Your car could be great, have everything going for it, but does not have any seatbelts. You probably wouldn't buy it because you wouldn't feel safe taking it on the highway. But that being said, if one car had 5 seatbelts and another car had 100 seatbelts, the other car wouldn't be 20 times better. Right? Once you have 1 seatbelt per passenger, you're pretty much good to go, and you kind of check it off. So people call that table stakes or must-have features. The third category, which is more interesting for product people, is delighters. So this is something that they don't necessarily expect to be in the product. If it's not there, it's not causing a problem, but by its presence, it really achieves higher customer satisfaction and delivers more customer value. So basically, you can take a step back as you're thinking about some new product or some new features and say, what are my must-haves for the problems I'm trying to solve for customers? And in this category, what are the performance features and what are the delighters? It's a simple framework to classify things. The other interesting thing is that things migrate over time. So, and I didn't use an example. A wow feature, maybe like 5-10 years ago, or 5-8 years ago, GPS nav in your car was a wow feature, right? Very few cars had it. All of a sudden, the cars that had it, the people just completely didn't worry about maps and where they were going because it just revolutionized it. Now, a higher percentage of cars have GPS, and so it's migrating down from a delighter to a must-have, right? So things migrate over time. There also, in the problem space, there can be dependencies in addition to those ladders. This is a framework I developed at Friendster because I had to. So on the left is basically what's the customer perspective, and then on the right is what does it mean to us here at the company. So it starts with, hey, is the product or site available when I want to use it? Is it up, which means uptime. The next one, is it fast enough? Is it responsive enough for me to use, which is page load time. Then does the functionality work, which means, hey, there's an absence of bugs. Then does the functionality actually meet my needs? That's the feature set. And then how easy is it to use? That's the UI and usability and design. So as product people and founders, we want to spend all our time at the top of the stack, but when you launch your product, you may realize, hey, we have issues at these more fundamental levels. So at Friendster, I don't know if you're familiar with it, we had issues with uptime and performance. We basically were the first social network out there at scale. So there wasn't, in a sense, we had a little bit of a monopoly for a brief period of time if you want to do social networking. But because of those issues, people were just not happy, and then MySpace came along and they went over there. So anyway, it's just important to think, and it can be correlated. Like you launch some cool new function, everything's cool with your uptime and performance. You launch some new feature that hits your database like 10 times as hard, and all of a sudden you lose your performance, and you got to circle back and fix that. Or same thing with bugs. So there can be, at different points in time, you need to focus on different parts of the stack. And then an interesting thing too is just all these bottom 3 layers, you're not actually increasing satisfaction, you're just decreasing dissatisfaction. People aren't running into problems or issues. It's only up here in the feature set that you're really kind of adding value and increasing satisfaction. Okay, and if this all seems kind of abstract and theoretical, I just want to show you some real data using this framework. So this is from when I was the head of product at Quicken. We had 13 key features in the product, and we surveyed our millions of users and asked them to rate the importance and satisfaction of those features. And so you can see here the data. Each of those points is one of our features plotted on importance versus satisfaction. And so in this case, and this goes back to that 2x2 quadrant thing that we were looking at, right? This feature, high importance, but also super high satisfaction. Me as a product manager with limited dev resources, I'm going to go, cool, I'm not going to spend any more time on that. We nailed that one. Let's move on. Let's figure out what else there is. This guy over here, you know, it's medium importance, but it's got really low satisfaction. It's an outlier, right? This one down here in the bottom left, the 41, it's like so low importance, I'm not as worried about it. But and there's the book, What Customers Want. The author is Anthony Ulwick. Yeah, it's just great. It's a thin book. It doesn't probably have the word product or product management in it anywhere, but it's one of the best product management books. And he really takes basically like importance and satisfaction and computes an opportunity score, and it's pretty cool. Okay, so the next thing we do with all this is great. We got clear on the benefits. We got clear on importance and satisfaction and which ones are must-haves and delighters and performance features. Now we're kind of coming up with what our product strategy is going to be. You know, which ones are we going to provide out of all the different choices that are out there, and how are we going to be better than our competitors? We don't want to just launch a Me-Too product that delivers the same benefits that some other competitor does. And so that's where your value proposition comes in, or product strategy. And basically what you can do is just create a framework where it's like, great, I got a laser, cool. All right. So must-haves, you know, whatever your must-haves are. And I kept this abstract here versus picking a specific category just so everyone can kind of relate. It's great, we're going to put ourselves up against some competitors. There's some must-have benefits, of course. We're all going to have the must-have benefits because we're in this category. Then there could be, you know, a few different performance benefits in this space. You know, maybe for a search engine, it's like, hey, how quickly do the results show up versus like the breadth of the results versus, say, the quality of the results might be 3 different performance benefits for a search engine. And, you know, maybe one competitor is really good at this one and the other competitor is really good at this one. And maybe we've identified some underserved segment within the market and they really value this a lot, and we're going to differentiate ourselves by really focusing on this different performance benefit. Of course, we're going to do a little bit over here, but we're going to focus our energy on this. And then maybe this competitor has some delighters, and we have an idea for a delighters. But this is really taking a step back, you know, ideally even before you do any coding or anything, and thinking about, great, how are we different in the marketplace? How are we going to win? How's our product going to deliver more customer value to people? Any questions so far? Yeah?
How did you define the 14 key features?
There were more, but again, it's hierarchical, so it's like reports. Yeah, you could run 20 different reports, but it's kind of like the reporting functionality. So we also had usage data, so it's definitely the ones that were most used by people as well. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I think there wasn't much of like, oh my gosh, it's a trade-off. We're not covering some of those, but it wasn't. Looking at the feature set, it wasn't too hard to figure out what the top ones were. Well, some of it was buckets, some of it wasn't actually. The one that was the 98% was actually reconciling your register, like balancing your check, like reconciling. So that was kind of, sometimes it wasn't a page per se in the product or a screen in the product. It was just a task or functionality you could do. Some cases there were tasks, some cases it was like a general area of the product. Another one would be budgeting. You know, budgeting consists of several screens in the product, but at a cognitive level, you know what we mean by budgeting, right? So that's kind of like, what were those big clusters of things? Yeah. Okay, any other questions?
How do you determine the importance to a user?
Yeah, so that's where, so one way is you ask them in a survey, and you say, great, on scale 1 to 10 or 7-point scale, and then you take top 2 box or whatever you want to do. So you can do it quantitatively with a survey. Usually if you're haven't launched your product yet, your pre-V1, it's qualitative. You're doing your user testing. We're going to talk about conducting user tests in a second. You're doing your user testing, and it's more, you could ask the person at the end of it, hey, on a scale of 1 to 10, how important or whatever. So you can try to get quantitative, even though your sample size isn't big, you can try to get quantitative. But usually you just get an intuitive feel as well. As you're doing the user testing and stuff, if something really resonates with someone, they're going to go, oh, this is great. And in fact, some of this important stuff, it's even pre-mock-up. So when you're like a UI design people, information architect people, do like card sorting exercise with people, or have them spend money or poker chips to say, hey, which of these, there are ways to kind of a conjoint analysis, ways to elicit the importance, even at the conceptual level from people. But beyond that, the other way is just, hey, people are using it a lot too. Once you have a product that's live, is like, hey, people, this is the highest percentage of active users are using this, and it's the one that people are using the most frequently. That helps you understand what's important too. Cool. Let's keep going. Now the next thing is we haven't talked at all about, we talked about prioritizing based on value, but we haven't taken into account any of the effort or dev resources or money or anything like that that's required to actually build what we're talking about. So you definitely want to get clear, phase 1 prioritization is prioritizing based on value. Phase 2 prioritization is taking that value as kind of the R return in an ROI calculation. And then the I is basically usually for most people it's developer weeks. It could be financial components to it, but it's really just developer weeks or months that we're talking about. And so you want to basically think about all the features you're talking about for your MVP or your V1 on this scale, and say there were 2 different product ideas and they both roughly created the same amount of value. Again, this is a fuzzy thing you can try to assess with testing and things like that, or you can ask people on a survey, but however you do it, you get some relative sense. It may just be high, medium, low, whatever. It doesn't have to be quantitative per se. Say there's 2 of them that have the same value, but you know that one's going to take twice as long to develop. You'd obviously go with idea A as a higher ROI. Sometimes 2 ideas have roughly the same ROI, but they have different scopes. So C and D both offer kind of the same ROI, but C is smaller than D. I'm almost always do C, just because it'll get in market quicker, and you'll get feedback on it more quickly, right? That's kind of if you push D way out, it becomes kind of waterfall-y monolithic feature development, where you sit down, heads down for a year, and then we launch it. You don't want to do that. You obviously want to break it down and get the smaller chunks and MVP out first. There are obviously bad ideas out there with low return and high investment. You want to try to avoid those if you can. And if you do good customer validation, you'll avoid those. Where I see this happen the most is you're in some kind of corporation and someone just says, hey, we got to do this. And the people that are close to the customers are kind of shaking their head going, I know this is kind of a waste of time, but we do it anyway. And good product teams want to try to come up with these high ROI ideas that other people haven't identified yet. And then really good people basically take that idea and then they work with development. They really figure out, okay, cool, let's break this feature down. It can really consist of 4 different things. Not all of them are equally important. Let's cut that one piece and worry about it later and just get the core pieces out for V1. So, and then once you kind of have this rough estimate, you can then say, cool, let's do idea A first. It offers the highest ROI, and then B, and then C, and kind of have a diminishing return curves for your idea. So, this is important as you're trying to figure out what's in MVP V1 versus time to market trade-offs. And same thing down the road with V2. Same thing with improvements down the road. Cool. So the next step is great. We got really clear on our value prop, and we got really clear on prioritization and scope of what our MVP is going to be. Let's go create a solution-based artifact that represents that and get user testing, user feedback on it. Ideally before we code. So the general principle being it's a lot easier to iterate and change things in the wireframing mock-up space than it is in the code space. So we're going to talk, obviously this is where design comes in, UX design. You have these You have these really well thought out product documents or user stories, but now we need to basically translate it into something the user sees, and this is where UX design comes in. And I like to think about it as an iceberg, because just like an iceberg is deceiving, only a little bit sticks above the water, but there's a lot going on below. Visual design is the piece that sticks above the iceberg. We're all visual animals. We all see the graphics and we respond to that, but product people need to be thinking at lower levels of interaction design or information architecture, conceptual design. And when you use a product and it just feels easy to use and it just feels good and you're in flow when you're using it, it's because someone has done a good job thinking through those other layers. This is a more complicated framework. I actually when the first time I saw it, I was excited. I'm like, cool, someone's kind of pieced together different pieces of the user experience. This is Jesse James Garrett's framework. You can see he's got information architecture, interaction design in there. And it's a PDF that's available at his website, jjg.net, if you want. But at a high level, real quick, is anyone here a designer? All right, we got some designers. Cool. Everyone, developers? Who's developers? One. Who are the other? What do you guys do? What else do you do? Product? Oh, we got product people in the house. All right, cool. Excellent. Sweet. So, and increasingly, product people are expected to know more about UX these days, right? It's great if you have a UX person on your team, but a lot of teams don't have that luxury, and so product usually fills that void. At a high level, there's three components. Information architecture is the structure and layout at both the site and page or screen level. It's also how your site is structured, overall, like what's the sitemap, how are we organizing the content and functionality on the site, how the site information is organized, and how, even at the page level, how each page is laid out. Interaction design is more about how the product and the user interact with one another. It's flows, so navigation across multiple pages or screens, input, controls, forms, things like that. And then the third component is visual design, how it looks versus what it is. And people always refer to this as Chrome, fonts, colors, graphical elements. And the analogy I like to use here is like if you're building a car, building a car on the factory line, like painting is probably the last thing they do. They work out what's the engine going to be, what's the frame going to be, and you can change the color relatively easily. Great. So then how are we going to get customer feedback? The key thing also of the problem space versus solution space is on the problem space, you basically need to elicit using different techniques what those user benefits are. Someone isn't just going to sit down and go, okay, here's my Kano model for what's important to me. They're not designers either. They're not going to be able to do that. So you need to basically elicit those. So they don't really speak problem space speak, but they can react to solution space, right? So if you show them a wireframe or a product, they can tell you what they like and what they don't like. So that's why you need some solution space artifact to put in front of them. Wireframes are low to medium fidelity, mock-ups are higher fidelity, and prototypes are like interactive versions. That the difference of it, usually a prototype just means that's throwaway code versus like your alpha or your beta that you're working on. In thinking about these different design artifacts, one way to think about them is the level of interactivity that the artifact provides, and then versus the fidelity of the artifact. So at the low end, we've got the awesome hand sketches on paper or whiteboards. They're obviously lowest fidelity artifacts that we're creating. Next step up from there is a static wireframe. These days, and then usually the kind of old workflow would be like static wireframe and then a high-level kind of high-fidelity mock-up. These days, the bar is kind of getting raised. It's easier to do clickable wireframes. Balsamiq is an awesome tool. I don't usually pimp out tools, but I'm a big fan of Balsamiq because I think it lets you quickly kind of get medium fidelity clickable wireframes out there that you can test with users. And then a clickable mock-up, there's a cool tool called envisionapp.com that you can take, like say you have a visual designer who's doing all this great work in Photoshop. They can export it as image files. You upload it to EnvisionApp. You can create hotspots and create clickable link areas and put together like a storyboard, at least for the happy path of the user experience, just like you can in Balsamiq. So it's pretty cool. So kind of the days, you can still get feedback on a static wireframe or mock-up if it's important, but it's a lot better to just do the clickable version so people can kind of click through and see the experience. You can do a prototype, and then we're getting up into the alpha. So just be mindful of what path do you want to do in your validation, and where are you? And my top advice would just be, if you can do clickable versus non-clickable, do it. Another way to look at this, the tools that you would use is kind of the design fidelity that you produce versus the effort to create it. Again, the hand sketch is down here, low effort, but also low fidelity. At the other extreme is Photoshop or Illustrator, where you're getting like pixel perfect, high fidelity gradients and things like that. And in the middle is this middle ground, and that's where Balsamiq lives. In the past, tools like Visio, OmniGraffle, even PowerPoint some people would use. Some people use Word. Just depends what they're comfortable with. But I view Balsamiq as kind of the new efficient frontier in that middle point. And a good process flow I've seen a lot of people do is, hey, we start out with hand sketches, then we move to Balsamiq, and then we eventually, if we have a visual designer, we move to Photoshop or Illustrator. That can be a way to kind of do iterative feedback at different fidelity levels. And so I like to say that, basically a product person should be able to do all this stuff, and then, a visual designer can do that stuff. If you have a UX designer, they can do it all for you too, potentially. So, or at least the bottom part. So this is, if you haven't seen a Balsamiq wireframe, this is what it looks like. So it's intentionally kind of sketchy, the way they draw things, and it's typical wireframe where we're not actually focused too much on colors or fonts. It's really about location and functionality. A lot of times the messaging too. Have everyone here, who's used Balsamiq? Cool. Does anyone else have a tool they like to use for that? Any other wireframing, prototyping tools that people, Balsamiq, cool. Just PowerPoint? Keynote, PowerPoint, sure, yeah.
Can I ask you guys to use the mic?
Oh yeah, sorry, yeah, cool. All right. Great. Cool. So yeah, and you can click, like I said, you can click these together. So if you were to click on these links over here, it would go to another Balsamiq page, and you can illustrate the story. And you can have a few different conditional paths. You obviously can't handle all the error states and all the different branching, but you can actually mock up a few different paths. Okay, so I would just advocate that you should wireframe if you're not. In case, first off, if you don't have a UX designer, it's a good skill to have. A lot of times on startups, you don't have a UX designer. Secondly, I find this really valuable is to clarify and refine your thinking, right? Someone may be, yeah, on this page we're going to do all these things. It's like, okay, great. Now go lay it out on the page. And you realize, oh my gosh, there's too many things to fit on this page. We need to chunk this up. So it helps you deal with reality, the realities of designing a web page or mobile screen. Helps you. You have to decide, great, I've got 5 things to put on this page. Which one goes on top? Which is first? Which makes you think about which one is the highest priority. How much of the page should that take up versus the other things? It just makes you think through those information architecture layout issues. And then navigation, if you got a clickable wireframe, it's like, okay, when somebody clicks that, where does it go? And so it helps you start filling out your thought process for your solution. It's also very powerful to communicate your ideas to others. I see this all the time when I consult. We'll be in a meeting and someone will be describing verbally what they think the feature is going to do and what it will be. Oh, we're going to have this wizard. It's going to be great. You can do this. And what's really going on is everyone in their own head is painting a picture of what they think the wizard looked like. And I guarantee what we're thinking about is not the same wizard. The chances that we're all thinking of exactly the same UI as the person who's talking about it is really low. And so this can be really helpful just to be like, this is what we're talking about. Yeah, it's a 5-page wizard. Here you go. Oh, okay, I got it. So it can really be good to communicate what you're proposing and get alignment and buy-in, get everyone on the same page, which can be especially important between like product and design and developers. When you don't have wireframes, if you're just going straight off user stories, there's a lot of room for interpretation, a lot of room for differences of perspectives. And the bottom line is modern tools make it easy and fast, so why not? Yes, you want to use the mic so we don't get in trouble? And so the people online can hear.
Just curious if you have any tips and strategies, like if you do have UX designers and visual designers, how to best handle the transitions between each.
Yeah, that's a good thing. And actually, I gave one talk. I spoke at IXDA SF with the designer guy, and we talked about how if you do have the luxury of having all these roles, how do you guys divide and conquer, and how do you do the transfers? And so, for me, it goes back to this workflow kind of thing. It's really like, hey, maybe as a cross-functional team, the 3 of you guys, whoever it is up on the whiteboard sketching stuff, and you kind of get alignment on a high-level UI. And then the UX designer goes off and does medium fidelity wireframes like in Balsamiq or whatever tool they like. You guys get together cross-functionally, review it again. Once you're kind of aligned on that, then you hand it off. A lot of the times I think about this like a relay race with a baton. You're all involved. You're all on the same team. At the beginning, products got the baton, figuring out what's the business needs, what's the goals, what are we trying to do here, what's the scope. But you're all working together as a cross-functional team. I would also have dev involved in that, by the way. And then, when you get enough alignment, hand the baton to the UX person who does the wireframes. And then once that's kind of locked down, you got enough alignment, hand the baton to the visual designer. That's a common way of doing it. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds same time.
Let's just hand it around. That way you don't have to get up and down. Just hand it around. Pass the love. There you go.
Yeah, just on the final step, whether you're gonna hand off, pixel perfect designs to dev, or if you're gonna give dev the wireframes and have them build the wired frames and then make those pixel perfect based on what they could do.
Yeah, there's different techniques, and it depends. Ideally, dev's been involved, even at the wireframe stage, so that they can get by with just the mock-ups. Another thing you might want to do to maximize your velocity is once the wireframes are done, is to already start having the devs build like the back-end objects and things that they know are going to be required. You know what I mean? There's a risk that the visual design stage you like have a feedback loop when you change something about the page, but if that risk is relatively low, in the interest of speed, the devs can start coding off the wireframes and then just apply, especially if you have really good style sheets and content guides and stuff, you can just kind of apply that last bit at the end. So the risk of giving them both at the end is just if they're inconsistent at all, they don't know which one to do. So is there a specific problem if you just give them visuals that you've seen happen?
No. I mean, as long as they've been involved upstream.
Right.
And then we just have issues of them having bandwidth to be involved upstream because they're working on the project.
Exactly. And if they're not involved upstream, then it's like, here you go, here's your JPEGs. And they're like, what? They don't know what's going on, right? So so it's really important. And in that case, maybe you just take the time to walk them through the wireframe so they understand why the visual design is the way it is. So.
Dan, since you're on that slide, we actually have a vote from a remote viewer for another prototyping tool called Axior.
Yeah,
exactly. AXURE.com.
I was waiting for someone to bring that up. So Axior, it's, so the one thing I'll get to why I like Balsamiq, one of the reasons it's $79 is a really good value. Axior, I think, is like $300 to $500, but it's more powerful. It actually lets you do kind of dynamic stuff and more interactive stuff. You can like say, hey, this thing expands, contracts, kind of like doing more JavaScript-y kind of stuff in Axior. So if there's a debate, it's like, well, is it better just to jump straight to jQuery and like just do it for real, or is it worth doing it in Axior? And usually if you have some kind of complex high interaction design, it may be worth doing it in Axior or some other high fidelity interactive prototyping tool. If it's something that's relatively straightforward, reusing existing components that you know work on your site, then I would be more likely to just do medium fidelity and jump right into coding it. Good question and good tool. That's one of the top tools that also gets mentioned. And then there's also some tools that are mobile specific, and someone mentioned Keynotopia. Keynotopia is just a set of stencils or reusable components that you can use in these things. And so that usually at the end of the day, if it's a mobile specific tool, it just means they've got what like the iOS slider looks like, so you can just grab it as a widget and put it in there. Specifically on Balsamiq, it's super easy. Why you should check it out. If you haven't, super easy to learn and use. They have a widget library like I was just talking about. It has a lot of UI elements. It's not the most exhaustive one, but it has a pretty good one. And if there's third party, there's like a website where people are posting new components that they're making all the time. You can annotate it with sticky notes. Annotations are very important in wireframes. The days of kind of a long PRD that has all the details that nobody reads are gone. So wireframes have replaced it. The problem is if you have a wireframe with no explanation, a lot of times then devs like, okay, what happens if this happens? And so you can point things out with sticky notes. So annotations are very important to say, hey, this data is coming from this feed, or hey, this is the validation criteria for entering this. As I mentioned, you can add click navigation between pages to illustrate a user story, which is awesome, and multiple paths. I've done that, which is cool. The other cool thing is, unlike OmniGraffle, I'm working with a client right now, the designer's on OmniGraffle, she's got to export it to PDF just so I can read it because I don't have it. Now maybe I should go get it. But the point is there's other stakeholders in the company that may not have that tool. So what's cool about Balsamiq is it exports to PDF. So the people you're sending it to don't have to have the tool at all. If you want to send it to other people in the company or to client, even customers you want to test with remotely, maybe you send them the PDF and you hop on screen sharing and you can do it with them. And basically the whole flow of multiple pages is in one PDF. And it's the best, $79, good price point. Anyway, end of sales pitch, but I just like it a lot. Okay, so we did that. We got our wireframes down. Now we're ready to actually talk to customers and learn from them and do some user testing. How many people have actually conducted user testing themselves here? Okay, cool, great. Was it live? If it's live, raise your hand. Live, okay. Remote? Remote, okay, cool. Great, awesome. That's great. So let's tie it back to our framework of problem and solution space. So what are we actually going to get feedback learning about? So in the problem space, it's basically all that work that we did. It's our mental model about what are those customer needs, our hypotheses about which ones are most important and which ones would they prefer. And then over here on the solution space, I view it as three main things we're getting feedback on. One is the feature set. It's like, great, we did this work and we thought that these functional elements would be important. We're going to get feedback on that. They may say, no, this is missing, where's this? Or they may say, this one that you built isn't important to me. We may be wrong on both those fronts. The second is the UI design. You may have gotten the feature set right, but the way you implemented the feature from a design standpoint just doesn't resonate with people that well. And the third actually is messaging, and this doesn't get a lot of focus, but I've found like the first time I'm doing a V1 feedback, users get tripped up on the messaging a lot. It's like, what? You guys are calling it a what? Like we just did this for a Social Security plan, or like you got to decide how to do your Social Security. They use the word strategy, and the people are like, strategy? I don't understand what you mean by strategy. And approach was a much more intuitive word. So messaging is often one of the first things that gets corrected when you do the first few tests, and then you kind of move on from there. Some quick tips on what I call ramen user feedback for startups. Like I said, I worked a couple blocks away here at Intuit. We were like pioneers in usability. We had a pristine millions of dollar lab, usability lab with cameras and one-way mirrors. And it was awesome, but you don't need that. You can basically just sit down with the customer, sit down with somebody with their laptop, with your artifact or your demo product, and just get feedback. The one thing that can be a little tricky, especially if you haven't done it and you're not super proficient, is the note-taking. So it's better if someone else can take notes, so you don't have to manage moderating it and taking notes. A lot of people try to get by that by videotaping it. In all the years I've seen people videotape it, I've never seen anybody really go back and watch the videotape. So it's kind of like an excuse, like, the developers are too busy coding, they'll watch the tapes. Like, they're not going to watch the tapes. So just get people there in person. And then what can be helpful when I do see people watch it, it's because someone took the time to create a highlights reel, right? But that takes someone's time to do that. So the best is to have everybody watch it and see the same thing. And it was great. I was in a stand-up just the other day, and one of the developers, they were having one developer said, I don't think we need to do this. And instead of the UX person, the PM person jumping up to say, I think we do, the developer did. He's like, I saw the testing last week, and you should have seen their face. We definitely need that. And it was pretty powerful. Typical format, I usually spend 5 or 10 minutes up front asking them, just kind of doing discovery about, in that problem space, about, hey, what are your needs? What are you currently using? What do you like about it? What don't you like about it? Just to kind of get some feedback on that discovery piece, on the problem space piece. Then we'll jump in for 30 to 50 minutes, show them the product or mock-up, depending on which one it is. And the goal here is to be as non-directed as possible. And when necessary, you can direct them and say, hey, please log in or please register. But the point is, if they say it's a web product, you're not going to be by their side when they're doing it at their house, right? When someone's like finds it on Google and goes to your website. So you just need to try to have it be as realistic as possible. And then at the end, and so as you're doing this, a lot of times people will get stuck. You'll start your test and they'll be like, what do you want me to do? And the answer is just do whatever. I always just go, imagine I'm not here. Do whatever you do. If you were at home on the laptop and a friend told you about the site and you were there. And so that can be, some people can get tripped up on that. But you basically just want to be a fly on the wall and not perturb the test. And then at the end is when you can kind of break character and say, okay, cool, you ran into this problem. Let me tell you why. You had these questions. Let me tell you why. You don't want to do that real time in the test, in my opinion. And then at the end, it's really important. Ask if they'd actually use it. When I was doing my startup, I was a big believer in this. I did 80 one-on-one user tests. It was kind of the price of getting into our private beta was you got to come by and do user tests. And at first, I was just doing usability tests. And then finally, I decided, let me start asking people if they would use it. And I had a couple of tests that went really well as far as the usability went. But at the end of it, I'm like, would you use it? Like, oh, no, I wouldn't use it. And they're just like, surprised. Like, wait, this went really well. Why not? Oh, I just don't read my news this way. I like to get my news from the newspaper or whatever it is. So don't confuse usability fit with like product market fit. That's an important distinction too. So the challenge is the messaging and bad usability can get in the way of getting that good product market fit feedback. So you need to get that feedback. Cool. Some do's and don'ts. Do explain them that basically they don't want to hurt most people don't want to hurt your feelings. They don't want to say anything bad. They're going to play it safe. So you need to like debunk that by explaining to them, hey, no, your feedback is going to help us make it better. The whole reason we're doing this, the whole reason we're taking the time, and the reason we're having you here is to make it better. So don't worry about hurting your feelings. The other thing is a lot of times you get like some people that are more soft-spoken or quiet, and what you really want some people to do is to basically like say what they're thinking as they're going through your UI. And so one way to do that is kind of coach them on like a think aloud protocol and explain that to them, and hopefully that'll help get more data. Yeah?
Can I ask a couple questions about how you've found people to use
Yep.
testing in the past?
Yep.
And then, if you wouldn't mind, do you generally know much to reimburse them?
Yeah, and it's funny because I just gave I just gave a 4-hour workshop, and the most questions that came up were, how do I find customers, right? And so it's funny because, yeah, and it's funny because I've done the full gamut. So usually for my clients, I try to be as affordable as I can, but we usually want to make sure we're getting high fidelity data. Like, let's just take the extremes. And I've done this too. You can go to Starbucks. You can do Starbucks usability and just sit there with your laptop and scope people and, hey, that person looks like they don't have anything to do. And hey, dude, you can do that. And that's okay for usability feedback, but it may not be product market fit feedback, right? Just what we were saying. Hey, yeah, okay. In the early days, it may be good, but you can mess yourself up if you start inferring product market fit from usability tests with people that aren't in your target market. I didn't have time to talk about target market. That's another. All the stuff we talked about for user benefits and preferences are based on a target customer. So that's the risk. You can do it. It's cheap. You have a low hit rate. I tried it. I was like, cool, I can't wait to try it. I did it. Starbucks in Palo Alto. Like, everyone's like us. They're super busy. They don't have time to do this, right? And then I finally went to the mall, Stanford Shopping Center. I found a few people like, yeah, my wife's shopping. I got time to do this. And we did that. But the other way to go, and what we do, and we try to keep it relatively cheap as we can, is to use a recruiting firm, and there are several in the Bay Area, and you basically write like a survey, like a screener, and they use that, and so what you make sure, but if you do a good job on that, you're going to have really high fit with your target market, and you're going to therefore be in a position to get good product market fit feedback. Usually they will charge about $100 to $150 to recruit the person. You're paying the recruiter that, and then in that case, you're going to give the people incentive. Usually, it just depends. I mean, if you're talking to college kids, maybe 30 or $50 is okay. If you're talking to busy people, maybe 100, 150, 75 to $100. If you're really specific, it's like, our product is for heart surgeons. They're really busy. They're probably worth more of their time, and they're going to be harder to find. So there's like the spectrum of how easy is it to find the people. If you're B2C, it's probably easier. But those recruiting firms, that's what I end up using most of the time. And in fact, that one client, I tried to go really cheap. I tried to do the Starbucks mall, and I just realized this is not going to work out. And so we went and did the survey. And you'll see in a sec, the example I'm going to share where I wrote the survey and we did that.
Just for, I guess, everyone else, we do a lot of user testing, and we've had sort of mixed results with TaskRabbit. It's been pretty positive, at the same time, sometimes unreliable, but that's just their outlet.
Related to that, my other client, they were like, they're in a regulated environment. They're in an environment where it's not easy. They're B2B2C, so it's not really easy for them to get to the end customer without getting permission from a bunch of intermediate people. So they said, let's just do Craigslist, and they were not happy with that. So what I have done is, if you want to use a wide funnel recruiting tool like Craigslist or TaskRabbit, is run them through a survey first. Just go straight into a Survey Monkey, and then they're writing the qualifying questions, right? That's what you do, and then you just save yourself time. Did you do that?
We generally do it over the phone.
Okay.
Survey Monkeys are great.
Save you time? Did I
idea.
save you some time?
I think you did.
Excellent, cool. And then use Google Forms, whatever you do. Just run it through, just let it run, and then,
We find we started on the street, and then you just get crazy people.
Yeah, totally.
And then you went to Craigslist,
Yeah.
you get less crazy people. But TaskRabbit, they do
Yeah.
background checks, so you can at least get some
Nice.
built around.
Yeah, there's different degrees of crazy or relevant to your target market, as we like to say, right? Yeah, and that's the other thing. You'll see, when I was doing the survey, it was in 2006, I had to put in questions. I felt like I had to, and I believe I did. Are you working full time or not? And how much do you really use the internet? And we had some qualifying questions to get at that. So sometimes it's okay, but a lot of times what happens is the availability bias. The people that have the free time are the ones that will come in and talk to you. All right, good questions. Let's move on. Like I said, you want to ask them to do whatever. If you do have a specific task, I like to do just undirected. Have them come to your homepage and see what they do. But if there is a specific task you want them to try, you can tell them, and then again, just shut up and sit back. Ask non-leading open-ended questions. So this is also a thing. There are open-ended words and closed-ended question words, right? If I say how or why, those are open-ended. If I say do you, yes or no, that's not an open-ended question. That's a closed-ended question. So that's part of getting good at being a moderator, is not asking closed-end questions, but asking open-end questions, and also not asking leading questions. Hey, this is a good product, right? Or, hey, this is easy to use, right? That was easy, right? You don't want to do that. Definitely take notes and review them afterwards for takeaways. Don't ask leading questions, like I just said. And as much pain, especially if you have a rough first product, as much pain as you see them in, don't help them or explain the UI. I've seen that too, where either because they feel sympathetic to the person, or because you're pissed that it's not as easy to use, or because you just know the product. You're like, hey, just click over here to log in. Yeah, that's where you do it. That defeats the purpose of it. And even if they're getting frustrated, they're getting lost, or they're asking you questions, do you want me to click here? Do you want me to do this? Just don't answer the questions until it's over. You got to keep it as realistic as possible. Definitely don't get defensive. I've seen some people do that. They get really defensive about the UI or whatever, or don't blame the user after the test. Like, man, that user was so dumb, they couldn't figure it out. It's obviously your problem if the user couldn't figure it out. Okay, so that's how we conduct the test. How do we actually iterate based on the feedback that we get? Again, let's go to our problem space, solution space model. And this, for the sake of, I like to think a lot of times of the product direction we're heading in as literally like a direction, like a vector. Like, say, okay, cool, we're heading in this direction. Based on all the assumptions we have, we're going this way. And say it, to take an example at a high level, we're going to do we're a travel startup. And we're like, hey, we're going to help people book their travel. We're going to help them plan their travel. And say, okay, we're going to help people plan their travel. So we have all of our assumptions in the problem space about our value prop, target market, what's important to them. We've done our wire, and we're basically heading down this path. So then we develop a mock-up or a code. We go and we create a solution space thing, and we talk to people, and then we get feedback. And we learn, and then we have to revise our problem space assumptions and hypotheses, and then we revise the mock-up, and we go back and forth. That's basically what the iteration does, in my mind. That's what you're doing, is you're hopping back and forth. You're revising your problem space hypotheses and assumptions, doing a new wireframe that embodies those new assumptions, and getting feedback, and hopefully getting more and more product market fit as you go, and learnings. This is so if you're doing a V1 product, I like to use the analogy of like you're whittling something like out of wood, and you start off with this gnarly branch, and it's got these branches, this gnarly piece of wood's got branches and bark and all this jazz, and when you look at it, you're like, hey, that's what my product is. It's great, it's awesome. Like you're so close to it that you don't realize. I mean, you may realize at a cognitive level, hey, we're missing a couple features. Yeah, there's some bugs. Yeah, the UI is kind of rough. Yeah, we didn't spend time on optimized messaging. But because again, it goes back to the example, you know what you're aiming for. You view it as this much prettier, easier to use, valuable thing than a raw, cold user would. And so it's kind of like, that's what they see, that's what you're seeing, and then you show them your V1 mockup, and it's like, hey, how much do you like the elephant? Right? And they can't even see the stuff that you're talking about. So in the early stages especially, you've got to work on getting that feedback that's just going to help you eliminate all those bumps and bark and all that jazz. And that's things like messaging and bugs and UI things that are just non-intuitive. And only once you get past all that stuff can you really get good product market feedback. And so that's why doing even the random testing up front can be good with random people, just to get through all that stuff. So anyway, and it's funny because it's weird. It's weird the way you make progress in this early stage. It's the absence. So say you show them a V1, you're literally your V1 design, and they give you 5 things that they complain about, and you fix all 5, and you show it to the next person. They don't say anything about those 5, but they weren't in the other tests. They don't know. Hey, good job, Dan. You got rid of those 5. They don't know. So progress is like the absence of hearing the same issues raised in the future in future revisions. So it's kind of this weird silence equals progress kind of thing. Okay, and then this question always comes up. So I like to use this mountain analogy here of the higher up on the mountain you're getting is the more product market fit you've got. You start out really low because you have some assumptions, but they're not all right, and your design isn't that great. And then you start doing this testing, and you start moving up. And maybe you start flattening out, and you start having diminished returns and going, gosh, we made some tweaks, we're getting a little bit better feedback, but people just aren't loving it. It's just not that exciting. And maybe you're talking to people and you realize, hey, there's this other direction we can go in, or this other target market we can go in, and there's really these other mountains that are out there, and basically you pivot, right? That's the definition of a pivot. And you say, okay, cool, we're going to change direction based on what we learned, and then we're going to come up here, and maybe you do another pivot. I mean, I don't like to pivot too much. If you pivot 3 times, you've kind of gone 180. So, it's too many times. Or gone in a circle or something. So I've seen people that do that. So it can be tough to decide when to persist versus pivot. And the way I view it is just you're trying to get enough validation that basically you're climbing up the right mountain. It really represents the market opportunity that you're going for. And you may have to hop from mountain to mountain to find the one that really has the highest elevation and gives you the biggest opportunity. Okay, so again, a lot of theory. Let's tie it together with a real example. So this is what I did back in 2006 for a client. It's kind of cool. It's very lean startup-y. As before that was even a concept out there, and it was really cool because the CEO was a business kind of high-level biz dev person, and he had an idea for a new product, and they didn't really have a product management team. So he brought me in, and also a designer, a UI designer, and his head of marketing was also involved. So the four of us were really the team. The goal was to validate the product market fit of this idea quickly without writing a single line of code, and see if there was a business opportunity here or not. The product concept was a marketing report that basically let customers control the direct mail. Like we all get all that junk mail at our house. The idea was, hey, is there some way we can create a product that'll let you control that, either make it more relevant or reduce it, basically. And the CEO had worked at Fair Isaac, which does credit reports and credit scores. So for him, he saw parallels to that situation where before your credit score and your credit report was just in some database behind some company had it, you had no visibility to it, and then you get transparency to it, you can kind of correct errors and things like that. He saw that here too. Like the reason you're getting this junk mail, the reason you're getting cat food off coupons is because some marketing database somewhere thinks you have a cat, right? And it's like, no, I really have a dog, and I either don't want to get the cat stuff or I want to let you know I have a dog so I can get dog stuff. That was kind of the idea. And each, honestly, the CEO and the VP marketing have slightly different views on it. So instead of doing one concept, I broke it into two different flavors. The first was a marketing shield. This was focused on reducing or stopping your junk mail. The second was a marketing saver, where it's more like, hey, you can say, no, I have a dog. Send me offers, send me coupons for a dog. You could opt in and receive money-saving offers that were relevant to you because you were telling him what was relevant to you. So those are the two concepts. Again, related. They're both related in the sense that it's going to help you improve your direct mail experience. So the first thing I did was I listened to them, talk about what they had in mind, and just organize the problem space to cluster things into benefits. So the core concept of the core idea behind both of the product directions flavors was find out what they know about you, they being the marketing databases out there, and that you as a user would see that through the features of a marketing report, a marketing score, just like you have a credit score, and a marketing profile. So you may have seen like these people, the direct marketing data companies out there have a profile. It's like they call you like a soccer mom, or you're like an urban hipster. Like they have these kind of demographic clustering that they've done. So the marketing profile is kind of like that. Then for the opt-in coupon concept, there was money-saving offers was the core idea there. There was also ideas of, hey, comparing yourself to others. And then because social networking was hot at the time, let's throw some social networking in there. Why not? The other concept about the shield of blocking the junk mail is all about reducing your junk mail. And there was a secondary different benefit of, hey, kind of an environmental benefit of save trees. So I just helped get clarity and define this. And then what we did is we said, cool, the shield concept is going to consist of those elements, and the saver concept is going to consist of those elements. And again, this is before we did any wireframes. We're just getting clear on the problem space and what we plan to do. And so that green part in the middle was the core. It was core to both concepts. And so what we did, I'll talk to you in a sec about how we did that in a sec. I'll talk about that. So this is now back to your point about recruiting. So and back in the old days, they would do a phone recruit. Those recruiting agencies would call. They'd have a panel of people that have opted in to do research, and they would call them and verbally give them the screening survey and see how they answered. These days, they just have their own version of SurveyMonkey, and they tell people to go fill it out. But basically, I wrote the screener to get segmentation. We wanted back then people who work full time and use the internet to make sure. For the opt-in offers, this is where we used our gut and we said, okay, if these people are valuing money-saving opportunities, then they probably are already using coupons or probably have a Costco membership, things like that. And what we did is we came up with 5 or 6 questions, and we said if you got a point for each one you said yes, and if you answered yes to 3 or more, you were in that segment, basically. Same thing for anti-junk mail. We're like, hey, these people are probably privacy-focused, security-focused. They probably have a paper shredder. They're probably not blocking caller ID. And that worked out pretty well. And some people actually were in both segments. We paid each person $75 for their time. On the number of people to talk to, I strongly prefer one-on-one. I've done focus groups before. You have like 6 or 8 people. Those are just get pretty dysfunctional for a lot of reasons that I won't get into. But in the interest of time, we really wanted to move fast. We had groups of 3, mainly 3, sometimes 2. Which was pretty manageable, and you didn't get groupthink, you didn't get people arguing with each other, and in case one person was a dud in the sense that they didn't really articulate what they were saying, or there was a no-show or something, it was a good way to do that. And I moderated. Basically what I did with the UI designer, worked with him, and he created these medium fidelity mock-ups on paper we printed out, and I would basically flip them through the page. They'd click here, and I'd say, cool, we're going through here, and I would moderate it. This is the home page that we did. You can see it's not hi-fi. It's like medium or lo-fi. And frankly, it's mainly about messaging. There's not much functionality here, right? It's like messaging. And so we got tons of messaging feedback. But that was the initial homepage. The way we handled, okay, this Shield concept has these things, but the Sabre concept has these things, was this kind of modular approach. Like once you logged in, we had these modules. And so you can see there's the Shield module, there's the profile module, compare yourself module, marketing score module. And so we would mix, we had two flavors basically. One had the Shield components and one had that, without having to do two different UIs that were too different. Okay, and then I ran it, and this is the feedback we got. Green means there was strong appeal, yellow means some appeal, and red means like low appeal. And so all this, the marketing score, which is a very fuzzy concept, people didn't get at all. They were not that excited about the core concept. But these people were excited about the reduced junk mail concept. And the Sabre people were excited about the money-saving offers. Nobody went for the compare yourself and the social networking. So that's what we learned. And so for me, the coolest thing that I liked was not just getting validation of the positives, but we actually were able to cut this now, right? You're trying to do an MVP. You're trying to get your target to market. You're trying to spend little resources. This thing was not well defined. We would have had to come up with a proprietary algorithm to calculate it. We would have had to sign up with third-party data feeds. It would have been a lot of time, energy, and coding and effort. We can just trim all that fat because nobody wants that now, right? So that was really, for me, that was the coolest learning, even more so than learning that people liked what we were saying here. Okay, what did we learn? We learned that overall the Shield concept was stronger. People didn't like many of the Sabre concepts. That being said, it's not like they're like, this Shield thing's a slam dunk. They were tripped up on messaging. They had lots of questions. There were a lot of concerns. And so the CEO was like, hey, Dan, that was great learnings. I'm like, hey, Scott, can you let us do a second iteration? Can we just do one iteration of this? Like, we've got a lot of learnings. And so he let us do with a smaller number of people a V2. And that was awesome. I mean, that was the coolest thing I saw. In the first time, people were shaking their head and concerned. This time, no concerns really, no major concerns, just a lot of nodding. It's kind of like we already knew what the concerns were going to be, and we had eliminated them all and answered all their questions. And so it was great. And at the end, we kind of said, how likely would you be to pay this, pay $10 for this? And it was a lot better response than the first time around. And it's always a little iffy if you're asking people if they would pay versus really paying. But these people were like, okay, thanks a lot. They're like, hey, can I sign up? When is this going live? Can I sign up? They were really excited and interested, but we didn't see the first time. Summarizing. So actually, this is the pivot. So this is the new page, junk mail freeze. So instead of marketingreport.com, we pivoted to junk mail freeze. We focused everything on this. And this is where also it's not just about the high-level concept. Some of the learnings we got, now I'm remembering, the last time I pitched showed this, people were really worried about, hey, you know what? You know how credit cards send you these pre-approved checks, the cash advance checks? They were really worried about that they weren't going to be home. Someone's going to take it from their mailbox, and someone's going to use their money. Credit card offers, same thing. Pre-approved credit card offers. There's a lot of concern about that, above and beyond kind of identity theft stuff. So summary, it took 4 weeks from the first meeting to getting that concept validated. Reasonable cost. It was like $100 some bucks for the recruiting of each candidate, $75 for their time, plus the consulting time for me and the UX guy. One round of iteration. We found a concept that I honestly think people are willing to pay $10 a month for. More importantly, we trimmed away the non-value adding pieces, and there's nothing super magical about what we did. You guys can, using the same techniques, achieve similar results. Okay, real quick, a section on metrics, and then we'll wrap up here. Since we talked a lot on qualitative, once you've got your product in market, there are metrics you can use to validate product market fit. I talked about survey results of importance and satisfaction. I'm sure everyone here not heard of Net Promoter Score. It's basically it's a question that says how likely would you be to recommend 0 to 10, and then they take the 9s and 10s and they subtract the 0 to 6s. So it's pretty harsh. It just kind of amplifies what your average would be. So that's pretty commonly accepted metric. Sean Ellis had as a tool called Survey.io, which is now it used to be Kiss Insights, now it's Qualaroo, where it basically says, how would you feel if you could no longer use product X? And there's some choices there. Another way of getting at the same thing. These are all people saying how they feel and what they would do. User behavior is always much more powerful. So the metrics that I would look at if I had a product in market would be prospects signing up, that means you've done a good job of conveying the value proposition. It resonates with people, and the way you're talking about it resonates with people. You get high conversion rates. Once they're in the door as customers, they keep using it. Retention rate is the best measure probably of product market fit. And then they use it a lot, high frequency, right? Those are all good measures of product market fit. Optimizing with metrics, basically, I like to get quantitative about it, and if we're trying to optimize our business, define an actual equation, and you can actually do this, and you may be at the beginning going, hey, how would I make an equation of my business? Well, one place to start is profit equals revenue minus cost. It works for every business pretty much. And on usually internet startups, we're focused on revenue. We don't really care about the cost too much because once we get 1 million users, we're good with marginal cost. And so I'll go through an example for an advertising model. In other cases, I've done it for a subscription model, other things. The point is you can do this yourself. And we start off with some high-level, fuzzy, high-level, unactionable metric. And the point is to keep peeling the onion and slicing the equation in a way that it still all adds up and is meaningful, but becomes more actionable. So revenue. For an ad-based business, this would be unique visitors times ad revenue per visitor. Ad revenue per visitor, we could break down into impressions per visitor times effective CPM divided by 1,000. Impressions per visitor, we could break down into visit per visitor, page views per visit times impressions per page view. On the unique visitor side, we can distinguish between new and returning visitors. Within new visitors, maybe we have some kind of invite or viral flow. So we've got invited versus uninvited, kind of organic. With invited, we can define some metrics for our viral loop. So we went from having this high-level thing that's not too actionable to something that we can. We say, hey, okay, cool, we want to drive more revenue. Are we going to? What's our current visits per visitor? When they come to the site, like how often are they coming? How many page views are they doing? You can measure those and try to move those. And this, you could write this all out as one big long equation. It all just writes out, right? And you could say the whole point you're trying to do is, hey, how much can I move this guy, and what's the effect it's going to have on this guy? You're kind of doing like a partial derivative, like a marginal analysis. You're trying to see like what can I do? Which knobs? Another way to think about it is knobs or dials. If I can move this dial a little bit, what's the impact going to be on the top line? This is a way to get actionable metrics, and then the key is to focus on which ones are important. This is an example, again, if it sounds too abstract, one of the key metrics for one of my clients was, for a lot of clients, is you have a registration page. What percentage of people register, right? And so this is over 9 months. You can see the data spans a lot from 30% to like 90%. Every major change in that graph is because of something we did, either deliberately or accidentally. And so if you're not tracking this data, you don't really have any idea what's going on. Here, basically, we were tracking along at 35%. You didn't have to register for this product. It was a free product that you could use a lot of stuff without having to register. We basically changed the messaging on like all the cool stuff, the additional cool stuff you'd get if you did register, and we saw that increase. Then what I was doing is basically doing usability testing on the reg page, and like people getting tripped up on putting in invalid passwords and hitting this kind of error and this and that and stripping things away on the page. We slowly increased it by doing a lot of good usability and UI design and validation and all that jazz. Then we had this nice clean page that was very light, and marketing said, wow, Dan, that's great. That page has a lot of real estate. Let's put some demographic questions on that page. And I was like, don't do it because you're going to lose. You're going to take a hit. And they didn't listen. We did it. And sure enough, it took a hit, right? So most companies, or a lot of companies that aren't metrics focused, they would just make that change and have no clue, be flying in the dark, not know what kind of a hit they took. We saw that we took a hit. And then over here, we started requiring registration for some key features that you didn't used to have to register for, and we saw it shoot up to 90. So anyway, it's good to look at these metrics. This is what I call a ratio metric. You're looking at something that can be compared over time and compared to other things. The whole point is to identify the critical few. You want to see where you're at. Again, it's like a dial. Each metric's like a dial. Where's the dial currently? And think about how many resources would it take to move it, and what kind of return would I get if I moved it. There's 3 kind of profiles. The first is like a good ROI. So this is an ROI curve. If we're here right now. If I put in this much investment, then I'll get this return. It's a decent ROI kind of return that we're facing there. There are bad ROIs. Maybe you're already kind of out here, or for whatever reason you're in a situation where it's going to take a lot of investment just to make a little bit of improvement in a return in a metric. And then what you really want to find, and these do exist, is kind of these asymmetric metrics where it's like really, hey, by really doing a good analysis of the problem and seeing what's going on, you can really see, hey, with a little bit of effort, we can really move the needle a lot. And it's kind of like instead of having a shotgun approach, like a laser approach and analyzing it, and you can really make a big difference. So you want to try to find those opportunities if you can, or at least be mindful which metric has what opportunities. Quick case study here on using metrics for optimizations from Friendster's viral loop. For us, that was a key way of getting new users was the viral loop. So I defined the process. Active users invite prospective users. They get an email. They either click or don't click on the email. Then they get to the registration process. They either get through it or they don't. Then they become users, and a certain percentage of users are active users who can then go on and do the whole thing. So step one was let's instrument the user experience and the business metrics that we care about. The next thing was let's get benchmarks on these, right? And let's define metrics that we can start to track. Percentage of users who are active, percentage of users sending invites, invites sent per sender, invite click-through rate, conversion rate on the registration page. So great, we got our metrics. Let's start tracking baseline, see where we're at. And if you multiply those all together, you get your viral ratio. And the whole point is to say, great, let's see where we're at and which one we think has the highest ROI opportunity before we go and expend resources. To make it simple, let's focus on these three. So basically, should we focus, if you're the head of product for Friendster, at that time, would you focus on percentage of users sending invites, on trying to increase invites per sender, or trying to increase conversion rate? Who thinks percentage of users sending invites? All right, we got one. Who thinks invites per sender? We got one. Who thinks conversion rate? All right, cool. You guys are really, you must be like psychic or something, because I didn't even tell you where we are on these, right? So these are 15%, 2.3, 85. Anyone on conversion want to change their vote now? Yeah? I didn't even tell you where they were. So anyway, I'm not trying to trick people, but it's just that's what, kind of, you don't know until you know what the metrics are. Okay. Anyway, so those are the metrics. Now you sit here and go, great, that's where we are. Which one do I think has a higher ROI opportunity? And so one thing that can differentiate metrics or to think about is just what's the upside potential of each metric. So for registration process yield, it's a percentage that goes from 0 to 100. We're at 85. Not a whole lot of headroom there, right? The max possible improvement, no matter what the best idea in the world we came up with, would be 15%. Over 85, it's like an 18% improvement that we could max upside potential if we knock it out of the park. The other one, percentage of users sending invitations, we're 15%, so that has more upside. 85, we can actually, if we max it out, we can get a 570% improvement. How about average number of invites per sender? What does that range from? Well, on the low end, it's 0. On the high end, I don't know. It's not like a percentage, right? So right now, we're at 2.3. What's the max upside potential on that? It's not as clearly defined as this, so people aren't going to have 5 million friends on average, but they could have a lot. So if it's a big number, say it's 100 friends or 500 friends that they can invite, you could have a really huge potential max upside. So for that reason, that's the one that we focused on. So then we go, great, what can we actually do to increase the average number of invites being sent out? And for each idea, we're trying to think how much effort it's going to take and how much do we expect it to move the needle on that? That's what we're trying to do. So back in 2004, nowadays it's pretty common, we decided to build an address book importer, and you had to build one for each mail provider at the time. And so we did the analysis again, and Yahoo Mail was the most popular within our user base. So we just said, okay, cool, let's go take the week it takes to build a Yahoo importer. So here's the metric again. It's really important. So we're tracking the metric. This is 7-day average data, tracking pretty much along at 2.3. We launched the feature. And then it takes 7 days to get to the new average, and then we double it, more than double it. So that's what I mean by that C-type metric, where like doing a really good analysis, you can get in there, find a high leverage opportunity, and just nail it, and then do your thing. So I was pretty excited about that. That was cool. Fist pump. Cool. So that's the talk. So just to summarize again, understand the lean product ninja, understand the problem space, identify those underserved needs. Define, get really clear on what your value prop is, how you're going to be better and different than other people. Create those wireframes, get the feedback, revise those 3 components of feature set, UI design, and messaging until you get increasing product market fit, and then launch, learn, and iterate. Just to let people know, in the city on the 10th, I'm actually going to be giving a 5-hour workshop. So this content is part of it, but it's obviously 5 times as much. And we have a special promo code for if anyone who's watching the broadcast or attending it, just put in Google. The bit.ly is bit.ly great prod, and the Google, it'll get you 30% off. And my workshop is actually part of a 3-day event. There's a product summit on Friday that Ken is also speaking at. And then Product Camp is more of like an unconference. It's in the city. Silicon Valley has had a product camp for several years. It's really big and popular. San Fran is going to have one on Saturday. It's like $25 to attend. So anyway, just to let you know some other product events if you want. If you have any questions about it, let me know. A friend of mine, Cass Phillips, also runs a really good conference called FailCon. This is kind of an interesting concept that's been around for it's maybe year 4 or 5, where basically they just focus on failure. They want people to come in and talk about what mistakes they made, what failures they had. And so she wanted me to offer $50 off coupon. It's just the failcon.com, $50 off, 50 Olsen. So just to make you guys aware of that. And with that, I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Why don't we take a remote question, and then in the meantime, anybody here in the room, just raise your hand. I'll bring the mic to you so we don't have to pass the mic around. So Matt in Boston refers us back to, in one of your earlier slides on the competitor comparison, you had a delighter benefit. And his question is, in the same product space, is it something you generally want to try to match delighter feature for feature, or do you want to try to differentiate and focus on your unique delighters?
Yeah, I think you want delighters to be unique. I think that basically the way to think about it in being unique, performance benefit, you know, it's like kind of the Andy Grove, you want to be 10x better. A performance benefit, you want to be significantly better. It's not like, hey, our thing's 10% faster. That's not going to be enough to cut it. So performance benefit, you want major kind of magnitude advantage or difference. On the delighters, I think it's binary. It's like you want to have something they don't. Right? It's like, what would be example? Like say Google search engine, when as you started typing, it would auto-suggest searches. Like that's a delighter feature that nobody else had. And again, guess what? It becomes a must-have then, right? I mean, so the way to think about it is kind of you have some monopolistic advantage with your delighter for some period of time, hopefully forever, but the reality is someone may be able to copy you unless there's a lot of heavy IP behind it, like, hey, these are tough algorithms, something like that. So yeah, I think it's better to select a different delighter than to, maybe you copy someone else's because you just think it's really cool or whatever, but if it's really necessary, then it's really a must-have, not a delighter. If it's truly a delighter, then I think you should find your own delighters. And the way to reconcile that too is ideally you may be focused on exactly the same target customer, but hopefully there's some difference in the segmentation so that you can kind of have a reason to believe that your delighter is going to create value for this other segment, and maybe the other delighter doesn't make as much sense for that segment. I don't know, but yeah.
So, just a question more focused on companies that have maybe a bit more of an existing product. Any strategies for sort of documenting existing product behaviors without, it's sort of for historical reference, without sort of doing an ex post PRD? Like, so we're very lean on the wireframing in the building, but then we have a bunch of products, and okay, we haven't touched this one in 2 years. What is it supposed to do? This tentative solution is like, okay, let's write basically the PRD after we built the product.
Right.
But maybe we could do something with balsamic or something like that for,
yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because everyone's moving so fast. You don't worry about the exhaust. You're not like, hey, whatever documents, whatever. They're on a wiki, and then they're just stale, and they rot really quickly. And very few startups take the time to go back and update those earlier artifacts. So that being said, if you do have a good system, like, hey, and it's tough because I'm thinking of Agile, like Pivotal Track or other tools. Like when you put the wireframes in the story, they're going to get like lost. Once that story gets accepted, it's like buried and lost. So it's almost like spending a little bit of time thinking about investing in kind of corporate knowledge retention and saying, you know what, we're going to have a wiki. We're not going to worry about keeping it incredibly up to date, but we're going to just put things there. You know what I mean? So that might be a way to kind of have a little bit of that without, because the biggest problem is you don't create the documents in the first place. The second biggest problem is you create the documents, but they get lost. They're not easy to find. And so I think that if you're creating the documents anyway, just having some, and the third is they're out of date. I wouldn't worry too much about the out of date and just say, hey, we're going to have a place where for each product there's a wiki page, and that's where we put in some kind of order, we put the wireframes that we built, And maybe worst case, if you can't find any of that stuff, someone's got to bite the bullet and write some high-level summary of what it was supposed to do. So, any other questions?
A lot of the sort of progress charts you see are for, or like your metric slides. It looks like I think Instagram's got the super famous one, right? Where it's like the multi-year, like then we got the hit here. Mm-hmm. Those are for the B2C non-seasonal sort of businesses.
Yeah.
When you're looking at something that's maybe take a seasonal e-commerce company.
Yeah.
You're going to have a natural massive spike.
Right.
Any strategies on dealing with metrics tracking when you're having massive spikes that are beyond your control and natural, and they're going to happen, and when they're going to happen?
Yeah, well, a couple things. One is, so that was a 7-day average. So averaging can be helpful and different time periods are good. So 7-day average is good. You'll see this a lot of times. A lot of businesses, it's like there's 5 data points that are high and then 2 that are low and then 5 that are high. It's like the weekends no one's going to the site, or it's the opposite. So 7-day just helps smooth that out. So that's one thing. Same thing applies for 30-day. So those are good averages. If there's time of year seasonality, then you can do annual averages, but then you're not getting feedback. So one way to do it too is just have it be, instead of it just being like chunks of weeks or chunks of years or months, is just trailing 7 days. So you update the data daily. You don't wait a week to update it. It's just trailing 7 days that you can do daily. Trailing 30 days you can do daily. Trailing 365 you can do daily. That's one way to get. You don't want to wait a year to see what's going on. Other than that, I mean, it's tough. If you've had that spike at least more than once, you can try to normalize and see where you're at. I mean, are you trying to assess performance? So like how are we doing this sales cycle versus the previous one, or what?
Yeah, so we're seasonally, on an annual basis. So like, and comparing, December to December, there's a million factors that influence how we did this year compared to last year.
Sure.
So I mean, we do A/B, so we'll slice vertically instead of horizontally. But then when you've got a ton of different variables that you're testing within any different slice, it gets tricky.
That is. It's it's an interesting problem. It's interesting. If you have a sample size of 1 or 2, it's hard to do some kind of normalization. So, I guess the other thing too would be, if you're trying to do it in the interest of learning, is maybe do some promotional tests or something. I don't know. That would be one way for an e-commerce company, and you want to get some more volume. But beyond the normal kind of forecasting, comparison, analytical normalizations techniques, I don't really have anything else to offer, unfortunately. Hi, thanks. My name is Dan Olsen. I'm excited to be here to talk with you guys here and everyone who's in the cloud. Just real quick about my background, kind of, so you know where I'm coming from. I had a technical background in electrical engineering, did industrial engineering, and then moved out to Silicon Valley to go to business school, and I've been out here ever since. I've worked in product management my whole career. I started out actually doing really high-tech product management for submarines for the Navy, and then after business school, I worked at Intuit for 5 years, where I worked as a product manager on Quicken and worked my way up and led that team eventually. And then pretty much since Intuit, I've been at startups. Right after Intuit, I went to Friendster to head up product management. So I've worked on some social networking stuff in the early days. And after Friendster, I was pretty much ready to do my own startup. I just didn't have an idea I was passionate about. So I kind of stumbled into consulting to startups as an interim VP of product. Some of my clients were Box and Usenda, Hippocrates. And then I finally had an idea for my own startup, your version in the personalized news space. We bootstrapped it, launched it at TechCrunch 50, won the People's Choice Award. And after we didn't get a hockey stick and didn't raise our next round, I went back to consulting again. So that's what I do now. And I'm happy I go pretty fast. I mean, everyone here is pretty sharp, so we can handle it. But I'm happy to email you my slides, so don't feel like you need to furiously take notes or anything. Okay, and definitely let's keep it interactive. If anybody here has questions about anything I'm talking about, let's talk about it, especially if it's relevant to what you're dealing with at your startup right now. All right, so my talk is how to be a lean product ninja. So I think before I used to always say, who's heard of Lean Startup? Now it's like, raise your hand if you haven't heard of Lean Startup. Everyone knows about it. But just to kind of summarize the key points that are relevant to this talk, it's basically about achieving product market fit, validating your product with users, improving and iterating your product quickly, and testing hypotheses. And from a role standpoint, I view product market fit as pretty much the product management role. Now, you may be a founder, I may not have the title product manager, but it's a role or a hat, and I view that that's the role that's responsible for that. Why ninja, aside from being a cool thing to call people? For me, it means that you have a high level of expertise, that you're self-sufficient, and that you have a wide array of skills and tools that you use. Especially at startups. I love talking with startups and entrepreneurs because you don't have necessarily a fully staffed team and tons of resources. Everyone's got to stretch beyond their comfort zone and fill the holes functionally that exist. And so that's when I think about a ninja, someone who can just fill those other gaps and do a wide range of things. So what's the formula for product market fit? We talk about product market fit a lot. I like to break down specifically what it means. For me, it means 4 things. It means a product that meets. You can imagine, great, those are my problem space. How am I tackling those at the feature level? You may have specific features, a tax interview wizard that helps you with that. Specific features that help with each one of those. It doesn't always have to be a one-for-one mapping, But the idea is, how is your product delivering against those features? And so you can think about that way how you want to map your solution space to the problem space. The next thing, once you do this thought exercise of getting really clear on the problem space, like I said, it's hierarchical. You're going to be brainstorming a lot of different granular stuff. There's a book out there called What Customers Want that I recommend, and you'd be surprised. The guy breaks it down, and I'll show the author's name and stuff in a couple slides, but he just breaks, you get like hundreds of things that basically support a product, really detailed things. So you get all these problem space statements or requirements, and then the next question is, great, how do I decide which ones to focus on? Which one should I focus on my product addressing? And if you have an existing product, it applies too. It's the same question, which ones do I focus on optimizing or improving or adding new functionality? And obviously, well, not obviously, but I think it should be based on customer value. You should be prioritizing based on customer value. And then the next question is, great, how do we define customer value? And this can be kind of fuzzy concept, but what you do see out there from various thought leaders is kind of consistency in frameworks. Certainly satisfaction. You see a lot of people talking about customer satisfaction. How satisfied are you with a given product? The other important aspect is importance. And so the importance has to do with the user need and the problem space. Like, how important would it be if I delivered this benefit for you? And the satisfaction is in the solution space of how satisfied are you with the current product. And so I kind of independently came up with that framework at Intuit. The author of that book came up with the framework, and several other people have these concepts of importance and satisfaction baked into some idea of how you think about customer value. So let me illustrate this here with the 2x2. I'm an MBA, so we have to have a 2x2 in the talk. So on the y-axis is importance of user need from low to high, and on the x-axis is user satisfaction with the current alternative or product. And basically, we'll just divide it into 4 quadrants. Down here, this is low importance of user need and kind of independent of the satisfaction of the users have with current alternatives. It's just not really worth going after things in this space. At the end of the day, the customer benefits just aren't that important to people. So it's not worth spending your time here. Up here, you have a high importance of user needs, so that's good, that's better. But you also have high user satisfaction with the current alternatives. This is kind of the definition of a mature market where products have been out there for a long time and they're kind of at parity. Everyone's happy with it. Customer needs, one that's better than other alternatives, one that's easy to use, and one that has a good value or price. And so for me, that taken together, that's what a product market fit means. And for B2C companies, sometimes they ask questions about good value or price if the product's free to end users. But the reality is people have finite time, and so you're contending for their time. If they're going to use one photo app on their phone, they're not going to use another one probably, so they're going to use Instagram. And they're going to have share of time for that category is another way to think about it. So there's a competing resource. Today I'm going to be focusing on how to meet customer needs and how to make sure your product's better than other products. I have other talks that talk about ease of use. There's a talk I gave at Product Camp earlier this year called How to Be a UX Designer on Me1. Should definitely check that out if you want. Okay. And so just from a high level kind of process, the steps we follow to achieve product market fit. First off, and then I'm going to go through each of these, but first off by starting understanding the underserved customer needs, and we'll talk about how we determine underserved in a minute. Secondly, defining what your product's value prop is. Third, building a wireframe or mock-up that represents that value prop. Fourth, getting user feedback on that mock-up, and then iterating until you achieve the product market fit that you want. So let's jump in. The first thing, it always for me starts off with understanding customer needs. And one concept that I found really powerful here is the idea of kind of thinking in the problem space versus solution space. Has anyone here heard of that kind of distinction, problem space solution? It's getting more and more common. It's more from my engineering background that is more common that we would think that way, but let me illustrate it a bit because I think it helps get clarity. So on the left-hand side, we'll have the problem space. A problem space is just a customer problem or need or benefit that the product should address. So it's like a product requirement or like a well-written user story would capture something in the problem space. Solution space is a specific implementation designed to address that need or requirement, whether it's a design or an actual product. That's a solution space artifact. So let me illustrate with an example. When NASA wanted to send people into space, they knew that they had a right and that the pens that they use here that require gravity weren't going to work up there. So they said, okay, we need to get a pen that's going to work up in space. And so one of their contractors, Fisher, spent $1 million in R&D and developed a space pen that writes in space, and you can write upside down, and it's pretty cool. When faced with the same challenge, the Russian space agency just gave the cosmonauts pencils. And so, there are reasons not to have pencils in space. The graphite breaks off and it can get in stuff and things like that. It could also be in your own product that you've just nailed a feature. Everyone's happy with it. You're at the point of diminishing returns and investing more in it. So where you really want to be is up here, where there's a high importance of user need, but they're not really happy with current alternatives. And another interesting thing on this front is they may not be happy with current alternatives, or they may be happy, but you come up with a way, like your innovative product actually comes up with a way to make them even achieve higher levels of happiness than they had before. That's another way of thinking about it. So this is just a helpful framework, whether it's identifying a new market opportunity or prioritizing feature improvements for your own product. Has anyone here heard of the Kano model at all? So the Kano model is another thought leader person who came up with this framework. You can see it's got user satisfaction on the y-axis from kind of completely satisfied at the top to completely dissatisfied at the bottom. And then on the y-axis is how fully is the need met. And the cool thing about his framework is he boils everything down into just one of three categories of needs or benefit, or features or benefits, basically. The first is performance, what you would call performance benefits or features. So I'll illustrate this with a car. Say you were trying to buy a new car, and there were two cars, and they were identical except for one thing. One had like twice as many miles per gallon as the other one did. You would prefer that one. And basically, miles per gallon is a performance feature. All other things being equal, you're going to pick the one with the higher performance. Must-haves are the second category, and basically here the presence of a must-have doesn't really help your product increase any satisfaction, deliver more customer value, but the absence of that feature or benefit causes a problem. So for a car, this might be seatbelts, right? Your car could be great, have everything going for it, but just not have any seatbelts. You probably wouldn't buy it because you wouldn't feel safe taking it on the highway. But that being said, if one car had 5 seatbelts and another car had 100 seatbelts, the other car wouldn't be 20 times better. Right? Once you have one seatbelt per passenger, you're pretty much good to go, and you kind of check it off. So people call that table stakes or must-have features. The third category, which is more interesting for product people, is delighters. So this is something that they don't necessarily expect to be in the product. If it's not there, it's not causing a problem, but by its presence, it really achieves higher customer satisfaction and delivers more customer value. So basically, you can take a step back as you're thinking about some new product or some new features and say, what are my must-haves for the problems I'm trying to solve for customers? And in this category, what are the performance features and what are the delighters? It's a simple framework to classify things. The other interesting thing is that things migrate over time. So, and I didn't use an example, a wow feature, maybe that's, I'm not trying to make NASA look dumb, but this just illustrates if you constrain your thinking in the solution space at the beginning of your design process, you're going to not be open to kind of lower scope, higher ROI options potentially. And you can actually buy a Russian space pen. It's a pencil in a box, as you can see. Okay, so let's bring it to software and web stuff that's more relevant. I want to illustrate at the product level. So, I used to work at Intuit a couple blocks from here on the Quicken team. TurboTax is another product. Hopefully everyone's familiar with that. And basically, when we talk about, okay, who's TurboTax immediate competitor, it's TaxCut. And if we try to map back and say, okay, at a high level, what's the problem space benefit that they're trying to deliver? It's basically helping you prepare your taxes. And one thing that was really insightful for me is Scott Cook at Intuit would always say, we would ask people, who do you think the biggest competitor for TurboTax is? And most people would say TaxCut. But he would say, actually, it's pen and paper, because at that point in time, pen and paper, more people were doing their returns in pen and paper and trying to change behavior to use software and online tools. But they're all mapped against the same problem that we're trying to solve. Now, once you have a digital product instead of pen and paper, there's a lot of other benefits it can provide. It can basically help you check your taxes, which can't be done with paper, file your taxes, help you maximize your deductions, help you reduce your audit risk. And so one of the things that's interesting about problem space and solution space is in the problem space, you can be very simple and just sum it all up like, hey, I'll help you with your taxes. But when you actually get down to it and break it down, you can get very granular and think of a lot of different problem spaces. Likewise, on the solution space, there could be a million different permutations of products that try to address these things. So let's take it at the feature level, basically. So we mentioned how one of the benefits, the problem space that TurboTax is trying to do is help you prepare your taxes. Another one, we talked about reducing your audit risk, checking your return. The other thing you find in the problem space is there are structures or hierarchies and dependencies. So these are all related. We could cluster them together and say all these three help deliver some overall benefit of empowering the user and making them confident about their taxes, right? But there's three distinct ones that we can do that support that. Likewise, there might be a separate save time cluster or hierarchy, save time preparing, save time filing. Instead of having to go stand in line at the post office and all that, you can just hit a button and save time. And save money, basically. And you can see, and the other way to think about these is ladders of specificity to kind of high level, and these are the high level ladders: empowerment, save time, save money. They're the same high level benefit ladders we used into it for Quicken as well. And then basically,